Read The Life of a Cell. All right, it's a beautiful little book. And when you look inside of a cell, you'll see little protons and neutrons and little atoms, whatever, all the things that are inside this cell, whether it's a rhinoceros's nose or whether it's your ear or whether it's a hair or whether it's a piece of dust or whatever. But just assume it's you, a tiny little cell inside of you. What holds the cell together? What makes the cell stay together? Do you ever think of that? Why doesn't your nose slide off? Don't you ever think of that? You got to start thinking of these things. How come your arm always hangs there, you know? How come it doesn't just fall off one day? It's always there. It does exactly what it's supposed to do. What's making these cells stay together? Well, scientists can't even answer that. They get to a thing that they call the source, that within every living cell there's something called the source. A heart starts beating inside a mother's womb 7 or 8 weeks after conception, and we have no idea. It's a total mystery to us. Not a physician on the planet can figure it out. Where was that life before? Where did it come from? Where does it go when it's not doing that? And what made that heartbeat out of nothing? How does that work? What is that? And how come in that tiny little drop of protoplasm is everything you need? I mean, it's your elbows in there, that hair that's growing over here that you don't want anymore. That's in that little drop there. And you can't stop it. You can't reverse it. It's all in there. The growth that has taken place in you, it's like it's all in that tiny little speck that you can't even see inside that cell. Life is such a mystery, this form business, until you begin to see that that isn't what life is. Like the person who eats the package and focuses on the package instead of the content. The package is your form. The real you wouldn't want to toss away, and so many of us do. Now, when there is harmony within a cell, within a tiniest cell you can find in your body, what happens to the cell adjacent to it? It cooperates with that cell, doesn't it? It cooperates with that cell. It doesn't eat it up. It doesn't try to hurt it. It doesn't try to destroy it. It is at peace. It is at harmony. And so harmony and cooperation become the essence of life. When there is not ease or serenity or peace within a cell, that is, when there is dis-ease or disharmony or an absence of serenity or arrogance rather than peace or aggressiveness, what happens to the cell next to it? It gobbles it up. It gets aggressive. It eats it up. It has no reference to the whole. Something that has no reference to the whole means that it has no regard for the whole. Like you have many, many life forms on you that are ugly if you look at them. Look inside your eyelid and study it. You'll see millions of little life forms, and then you magnify them. They got claws, and they got teeth, and they're in your eyelid, and there's millions of them. But they have a reference to the whole. They don't gobble up your eyeball. They don't say, I think I'll take an ear today. They don't do that. They stay where they belong, and they have a reference to the whole, and they work in conjunction with or in harmony with the whole, as do all the bugs in the lining of your stomach and in your intestine and your toenails inside your nose. They all have a reference to the whole, but cancer doesn't do that, does it? So it will eat up each cell because it doesn't have harmony within. And what will it do to itself? It'll destroy itself, won't it? A cancer in society is the same way. A cancer in society is one of us who is one cell, who doesn't have ease within itself, it has no reference to the whole, that is all the rest of us, or all of society, and doesn't see itself as part of all of you, and it will gobble up all of those around it until it destroys itself, doesn't it? So what is the answer to a cancer in our body and a cancer in our society? Is to get harmony within. And when you get harmony within, you cooperate with the cell next to you in order to save yourself. Now that's just like a little mini lesson in metaphysical philosophy. Now imagine me up here with you making yourself into a cell for a second, so that you got all these tiny little cells, and this philosophy applies. Now imagine we can all just stand back and see all of humanity, 6.5 billion of us, or 6 billion of us. Is that what we have now? And here is this huge mosaic that constitutes all of humanity, and it's a puzzle, and it has 6 billion pieces in it, but there's one missing. And you can get back far enough and see it. Where do your eyes go? Right to the missing piece. The totality of that life form is not complete without that missing piece, is it? That's how important you are. You make all of humanity complete. You are the I that is we. just like the I that is we, that is inside of your pancreas. You are alive with life, all the different bacteria and all the trillions of cells and so on. And it's like you walk around all day long, you think, gee, I'm an individual all by myself and I'm an island and all that. And you got zillions of little things inside of you going. And without them, you can't make it. And when something comes along inside your organism that no longer has a reference to the whole, isn't connected to the whole, you're eliminated and so is it. Aren't you? Disharmony, then, becomes the thing that destroys us. And as long as you are in harmony and positive, and when people say, well, positive thinking is just a crock, it isn't, in the sense that a positive thought keeps you in harmony with the universe, and a negative thought keeps you away from it. Because we are thought, and the universe is thought, the fastest vibration, we have the capacity to either destroy or create, and we're the only things that do. That's why we're different than a pig and a horse, because we have a mind, and that mind is part of the universal mind. That unity, that oneness, is not any different. Like I am as connected to you, but just because I'm 10 feet away from you, I am still a part of this totality called humanity, just like the bug that is 8 feet away from me down in my toenail, which seems so distant from me, but is still a part of me, is real as well. It's all one. So that oneness, that universalness, is not just some speculation. You connect to it all. And if all of us have harmony within us, gentle harmony within us, and we're flowing with the universe, it's just the most powerful thing in the world.
The idea of having a quiet mind. When I first started practicing meditating, which I encourage people to do, not from any Far Eastern guru loincloth kind of thing at all, but as a way of understanding that there's another dimension. If I were to take you, the listener, and to put you in chains, and to put you in a dungeon, and to deny you light and human contact for the rest of your life, you would probably say to yourself, this is the end. This is the end. I can't handle this. There are some people, believe it or not, among us, who, if you were to do that very same thing, would say, this is a beginning. There's a whole world there. If any of us were forced to learn how to go into that world, we would discover many, many, many things about ourselves. And I'm talking about the world of the mind. It's not an accident that all of the great spiritual masters have encouraged a kind of meditation of one kind or another, and that most advanced people, most awakened people, practice it on a regular basis. It's not an accident. You begin to discover how slimy your mind is. The thoughts that you have all the time, and how much disasterizing we do with our minds, and how much stuff that we occupy our minds with that is so unnecessary and so silly, so foolish, so destructive, that quieting our mind and meditating really go hand in hand. Now, meditating doesn't require a lot of training. It doesn't require somebody teaching you exactly how to do it or whatever, because that defeats the purpose of meditating. When you meditate, you really want to go in there and quiet your mind. And what you want to be able to do in your life is to have an open, but not a rampage going on inside of your mind, not 1,000 thoughts barraging it. And these thoughts that you have, these are yours. These are your creation. I used to tell people as a therapist, if you don't believe that you're in control of your thoughts, then I want you to tell me who is. Then I want you to find all those people who are in control of your thoughts and send them all to me. Then I will treat them, and you will get better, which is absurd. Obviously, you're not going to get better by treating somebody else. You are the creator of thought, which means that in some metaphysical way, you're the creator of your life. Thought originates with each one of us. But most of us have trained ourselves to believe that whatever we think just sort of happened, and thoughts just sort of, I call it the pop-in theory, They just sort of pop in, and I can't help it. Boop, there's a thought, and it's just there. And I can't help it, it just happened. That isn't true when you train your mind. We spend so much of our energy training ourselves in all kinds of areas. We train ourselves in business. If we're going to get a new computer system, we go out and we spend millions of dollars in a company, and we train people how to work it. And if we want to become good at golf or swimming or tennis or backgammon or anything that you can think of, we know that we got to go out and we got to practice and we got to train ourselves. We train ourselves, and we ignore our mind, which is 99% of who we are. We just completely ignore it. Like there's no training available for our minds. And we can all do that. I've really learned how to do it myself. No one ever taught me. When I used to teach at a university, I taught in Berlin for half a year. There were 70 students in the class. and I would have the first student introduce themselves and their name. Then I would have the second student introduce the person who was just introduced and himself. And each time I would repeat it. And I'd have the third student introduce the two that he had just introduced plus himself. And we do that for the whole class. By the time we got to the 70th student, they had to introduce everybody in the class by name, and I would then repeat each one of them. And I just had a very simple technique for doing that. It was just like concentrated effort on making my mind remember 70 people's names in an hour and a half. Now, I wasn't doing it to waste an hour and a half. This was a class on teaching people how to identify neurotic behavior in people. And it's like what I wanted to do was to teach them that they could do things with their minds, just like their patients do, that they never thought of, that they never even dreamt were possible for them. 2 weeks later, 3 weeks later, they would have like 80, 90% recall. And by the end of the fourth or fifth week, everybody knew everybody's name in the class, and they had all trained themselves. And most people go out there and they're introduced to somebody, they say, hello, my name is Wayne. They say, what would you say your name was? They can't remember one person's name in 1 minute. And they think that, oh, I have a poor memory. But it's because they don't train. Well, the mind can be trained, and meditating is a perfect way to do that. And there's a wonderful world in there, in your mind. Quieting your mind means that you're no longer susceptible to all of the external influences that are around you. I'm always amazed when I watch the U.S. Open tennis championships that are played in New York right near LaGuardia at how the players are able to continue playing with jets going on overhead. And yet, when I am really completely involved in a tennis match, I've had people where I've played, I've had jackhammers going next to me, and my opponent is going crazy. They have to go over there, and I tell them, I don't notice it. My concentration is on the ball. And I don't hear that lawnmower going off or the jackhammer going or the airplane going on overhead. We can train ourselves to do that. The people who are really good at any game or any activity that requires concentration know how to do that. Well, we all want to be able to be better at that, and we don't want to have our minds occupied, particularly with worry and anxiety and stressful kinds of things. So you have to learn how to focus your mind, how to get focused, and keep yourself from creating those kinds of thoughts that are always impinging on your consciousness. Miracles are available there. You talk about surrendering. I meditated for a long time. It's like there would be a light. I would have this light that I would create. And it's really interesting that you can create a light with your eyes closed in a dark room. So you don't really need your eyes to create light. You need your mind to create light. Your mind can create light. And all of us do it in our dreams. We can create a color in our dream without any light. So that our minds are capable of producing that. And our minds can create smells, and we can create sounds. We do all of that in our dream. And that's just a pure thought state. So what you want to do is get to that pure thought state.
But remember the word coincidence. In mathematics, it's a term that defines angles that coincide. And in mathematics, two angles that coincide are said to be angles that fit together perfectly. And we have taken a term that means something that fits together perfectly and interpret it to mean that is something that fits together and shows up accidentally or in chaos. But actually, anything that is coincidental with something else is a fit that is perfect. And there are no accidents in this universe. When you begin to access a power, you start to have an awareness that it's absurd to believe that in a universe which has an intelligence behind it, that an accident could show up. Everything is a part of the perfection of it. Everything. There are no accidents in this universe. You came in when you were supposed to, you'll leave when you're supposed to. The children that came through you or didn't come through you are all part of that perfection. Questioning it, challenging it, all it does is keep you from accessing the ability to manifest and attract into your life what you really would like to have when you begin to question it. And when you ask, now the question always comes up when I talk about these kinds of things is, well, if there is a force, and this force is a part of the perfection and there are no accidents, at what point do I have a free will? And am I making any of these decisions? And Jung answered that question brilliantly. He said, at the same moment that you are a protagonist in your own life and you're making choices, you are also the spear carrier or the extra in a much larger drama. You are doomed to make choices. And that paradox is something you have to live with. Yes, you are making choices. Yes, you have the capacity to attract into your life virtually anything you want. And yes, there is an intelligence into which you can connect that can access virtually anything you put your attention on. And yes, it's all part of the perfection of the universe. Yes, both of those things you have to live with at the same time. You have to transcend those dichotomies. But I want to speak just for a few moments about what happens when you leave ordinary levels of awareness and you leave these lower energies. When you leave the energy of the solid, where all of your problems occur, when you leave that and move into this energy of spirit, wherein you only have love to give away, as I spoke about earlier, where your response to sadness is always a higher energy of joy, where your response to doubt is always a higher energy of faith, where your response to hatred is always the higher energy of love. When you practice what Francesco taught us in that very famous prayer attributed to St. Francis, what happens when you reach these higher spiritual energies is that you start to access something in which you can see it coming. And you get outside of yourself, as I just spoke about. And that is called intuition. And that intuition is available to you, that you can practice it virtually any time in your life, but you've got to get out of these lower and slower energies because it's not accessible there. It doesn't exist there. Problems exist there. Fear exists there. Worry exists there. Guilt exists there. Hatred exists there. Anger exists there. These are all lower and slower energies. And when you listen to the 10th principle, you'll see that they're not just lower energies, but they weaken us whenever we access them and whenever we use them. But when we get outside of them, we start to get out in front. And now I suggest to you, brazenly, that you don't have to have accidents in your life. That you don't have to be a victim of crime in your life. That you don't have to live in a world of scarcity in your life. You don't have to. If you're willing to take responsibility for whatever acts of crime have come your way without guilt, if you're willing to, and just say, I own them, they're mine, I've attracted it for some reason. If you're willing to say, I have had these various accidents and I've attracted that into my life, I don't understand why, but I know that it's mine. If you're willing to say that I've attracted the wrong people into my life, people who have abused me and victimized me, and I have taught people how I'm willing to be treated, and I'm no longer willing to do that, and so I'm going to send out a different attractor energy. If you're willing just to take responsibility without guilt, I underline it, I don't want any letters, okay? I underline it. You do not deserve any of it. You are not being punished for the things that have happened in your life. You just own them. They're yours. Because you can't get past them if you're waiting for something outside of you to change. You get past them by taking responsibility for them. Then what happens is you start seeing an accident coming. And many of you have had that experience. When you are in a higher frequency in your life, and you have an intuitive sense that, I know it's a green light, but I think I better stop. You know, a lot of heads nodding up and down. And something tells you, whatever it might be, something tells you, I better stop and slow down here. And zoom, there goes somebody through a red light, and you stop and you have that feeling that goes through you, go, what was that? What was that? And you know when you can access that? When you're close to God. When you're in fear, you can't access it. God's one and only voice's silence means that God is that which is indivisible. There is no place that God is not. And you can't divide God up and say that God is on this side or God is on that side. I've often said that God isn't doing anything different now than God was doing an hour ago or 100 years ago. And God isn't doing anything different now than he will be doing 1,000 years from now. God is exclusively here and now, not elsewhere, not in heaven someplace apart from us, but here, now, and indivisible. And the word indivisible is very important, because that which is everywhere and cannot be separated or carved up is something that we have a great deal of difficulty in the world of the physical form experiencing and understanding. Because our world, the world of you listening here, is a world of dichotomies. It's a world of paradoxes. We divide everything up. And dichotomies are just our way of being. We divide everything in the world up. The only reason we know that something called darkness exists is because of light. If there was nothing called light, we wouldn't know anything called darkness. The only reason we have a concept called up is because we have something of its reverse called down. You've never seen a person with a front who doesn't have a back. You've never seen a person with an outside who doesn't have an inside. We divide everything. Everything is in the world of the divisible. In the Bhagavad Gita, it speaks about transcending the dichotomies, figuring out a way to get past the up-down, the male-female, the good-bad, the right-wrong, the old, the new, the alive and the dead. Everything has its dichotomy. You can always find its opposites. In fact, that's how the symbolism of language is created, through having opposites. We don't know about oneness in the physical world. Everything has its counterpart, its dichotomy, except for silence. Silence is the only experience that is the same as God. It is indivisible. You take silence, and we'll have some right now, and now let's just cut that in half. And what do we have? More silence. Let's take what we've cut in half and cut it in half again and again. And endlessly you attempt to divide into a dichotomy, silence, but you can never do it, because silence is indivisible. And silence is God's one and only voice. When you go into silence, you go into the place where you make conscious contact with God, whatever it is that God means to you. You make conscious contact with that omnipotent, omniscient force in the world, that omnipresence of God. And the reason I say that it's not crowded along the extra mile is because the mile that most people are on is a very, very noisy mile. And I encourage young people to become more comfortable with silence. We live in a world of bulldozers and leaf blowers and trucks that make endless amounts of noise and chatter. And constantly, I have a home, a place a retreat that I go to frequently on Maui. And oftentimes I will walk in the morning and they're in a big building project in Maui. And I'll go past one building after another and start to count the noisemakers, as all of these machines and all of these people who are trying to make the place look so pristine and so beautiful and so landscaped, instead of just letting it grow, just letting it be. Silence and God are one because you can't divide either one of them. Okay? So that going to silence as frequently as you can, and understanding that out of silence everything is created. The words that you are listening to right now as I speak emerge from silence. That silence is the source. And it's the source that is what we want to make conscious contact with. Like the source of all light is the sun. And the only reason we know about light is because of something called darkness. But when you go to the source can't be divided.
Non-erroneous zone people, which I now call Nez and EZ, are different from the normals in our world. While they look very much like everyone else, if you observe very closely, you'll note distinct qualities, none of which are racial, socioeconomic, or sexual, which disconnects them from so many other people. They do not fit neatly into any role definition, job descriptions, geographic patterns, educational levels, or financial statistics. There's a different quality about them, but the different part is not discernible by scanning the traditional external factors that typify many efforts at classifying people. They may be rich or poor, male or female, black or white, living anywhere, doing just about anything, and yet they are different in that they have no erroneous zones. How can you tell when you run into a Nez person? Watch them. Listen to them. This is what you'll discover. First, and most obviously, you see a person who likes virtually everything about life. Yep, this is a liker. A person who is comfortable doing just about anything, and one who wastes no time in complaining or wishing that things were otherwise. They are enthusiastic about life, and they want all that they can get out of it. They like picnics, movies, books, sports, concerts, cities, farms, animals, mountains, and just about anything that you can include in your list. They just plain like. When you are around them, you'll note a startling absence of grumbling, moaning, or even passive sighing. If it rains, they like it. If it's hot, they dig it rather than croak about it. If they're in a traffic jam or at a party or all alone, they simply deal with what is there. No pretending to enjoy, but a sensible acceptance of what is, and an outlandish ability to delight in virtually everything. Ask them what they don't like, and they are hard-pressed to come up with an honest answer. They don't have sense enough to come in out of the rain. Why? Because they see rain as beautiful, thrilling, and something to experience. They like it. Slush doesn't send them into a fury. They observe it, splash around in it, and accept it as a part of what it means to be alive. Do they like cats? Yes. Bears? Yes. Worms? Yep. You'll be hard-pressed to come up with things, events, people, activities, or ideas that they dislike. They live, and while such annoyances as disease germs, droughts, mosquitoes, floods, and the like are not warmly embraced by Nez people, they never spend any of their present moments complaining about them or wishing that they weren't so. If situations need to be eradicated, then they will very likely work as eradicators, enjoying themselves and living all of their present moments. Try as you might, you'll have a tough time coming up with something they'll dislike doing. Truly, they are likers of life, and they wallow in all of it, getting out of it all that is possible for them. A Nez person is free from guilt and all of the attendant anxiety that goes with using up your present moments, being immobilized over past events. Certainly they can admit to making mistakes, and they can vow to avoid repeating certain behaviors that are counterproductive in any way. But they do not waste their time wishing that they hadn't done something, or being upset because they dislike something that they had done at an earlier moment in their life. Complete freedom from guilt will be the shocking behavior that you will observe in your Nez person. No lamenting the past, and no efforts to make others choose their own guilt by asking such inane questions as, "Why didn't you do it differently?" Or "Aren't you ashamed of yourself?" And so on. They seem to recognize that life lived through is just that, and no amount of feeling bad will alter the past. While they practice this non-guilt on themselves without any effort, because it is natural, they are remarkably free from even helping others to choose guilt for themselves, because they see with a third internal eye,
That feeling bad in the present moment only reinforces a poor self-image, and that learning from the past is a far superior tact over remonstrating about the past. You'll never see them manipulating others by telling them how bad they've been, nor will you be able to manipulate them with the same tactics. They won't get angry at you. They'll simply ignore it and see you as someone who is a guilt dispenser. Rather than being upset at you, they'll go away, or they'll change the subject. Hence, you won't even recognize that the very strategy that works so beautifully on most people has failed dismally on your Nez friend. Rather than smear themselves and others with guilt, they just unceremoniously pass when it comes along. Similarly, your Nez chap will be a non-worrier. You'll soon note that circumstances that drive many people to frenzy will be mildly internalized by a Nez person. They are not planners and putters away for the future. They refuse to worry when you do, and they keep themselves unmucked up by the accompanying anxiety that goes with worry. You can't drive him or her crazy with worry. They don't know how to do it. Almost as if it is just not a part of their makeup. Not necessarily calm at all moments, but just unwilling to spend any present moments disasterizing about things in the future over which they have no control. They are very present moment oriented, and they have an internal signal that seems to remind them that all worrying must take place now in the present moment, and that it is a foolish way to go about living one's current life. With no present moments ever available for awfulizing, they just never seem to get around to the business of worry that so occupies most lives. Your Nez person is able to live now rather than in the past or the future. They are unthreatened by the unknown, and they seek out experiences that are new, untried, and unfamiliar to them. They love ambiguous things rather than being upset by them. They love the now in virtually all settings, being aware that this is all that they have. They don't plan for a future event and let long periods of inactivity elapse as they await a payoff. The moments between events are just as livable as those taken up by the events themselves, and they have that uncanny ability to get every pleasure out of their daily lives. They are not postponers saving for a rainy day, and while their culture admonishes such behavior, they are unthreatened by reproachment. They gather in their happiness now, and when a future now arrives, they gather in that one as well. Strange, but this Nez individual is always enjoying simply because they see the folly of waiting to enjoy. This is not some special credo that they've adopted. It is the natural way of living, very much like that of any child or all animals. Grabbing heavy doses of present moment fulfillment, while most normals spend their lives waiting for their payoffs and never being able to seize them. These people are strikingly independent people. They are out of the nest. And while they have a strong love and devotion for family, they see independence as far superior to dependence in all relationships.
So, knowing that we have a higher self, or a highest self, really means detaching ourselves from a lot of the things that we have come to believe is who we are. Now, the beliefs that we have, that we've grown up with, that we've practiced all of our daily rituals on, is what I call the tribe thinking, the thinking of the tribe. You see, all of us are members of a tribe. And that tribe might be your immediate family, it might be the ethnic group to which you belong, it might be the people who share the same color of skin that you happen to have. It may be people who have the same philosophical points of view, or political points of view, or religious points of view, or people who are related to you genetically in some way, cousins and aunts and uncles and so on. Anyway, there's this tribe that we sort of are born into, if you will. What I'm talking about here, when you come to know your higher self and to live by it, is leaving the tribe and leaving tribal consciousness. You see, to be an individual, when you go to the tribe and you tell them, I've discovered something that's about manifesting, and I'm going to really practice this, and I'm going to do this, and I know I can do this. It's Jesus said we can do this. Sai Baba told us we can do this. Muktananda tells us we can do this. I'm going to do this. What I'm saying to you is that if you're going to learn manifesting, and you're going to understand your highest self, you have to somehow figure out a way to let go of this idea that the tribe is going to give me approval, or that I'm going to do it within the parameters that the tribe has dictated. Because what you're doing when you're learning to manifest, or when you're learning anything that is outside of the restricted parameters of the tribe, what you are doing is you are speeding up the evolution of your awareness and your consciousness. You are saying, I am going to evolve at a faster rate. But if you go to the tribe and tell them that, immediately you're going to get put into your place. You see, the mantra of the tribe is, but what will they think? That's the mantra of the tribe. What are they going to think of me? And the minute that you start playing that game of what are they going to think, you have stopped yourself from being able to evolve at a faster rate of speed. You don't go talking about it. I happen to be talking about it because I'm trying to encourage you to do it. But I don't, when I decide that I want to manifest something, when I put my attention on that, that's a very private matter between me and God. The reason that you don't share it is because it takes the energy away from what you are doing and puts it on the attention of the person that you're trying to convince. Immediately you get ego in there. And the minute that you get ego in there, you shut down the energy. You shift. So leaving the tribe and the tribal consciousness is really, what you're saying is, if I'm going to evolve at the speed at which the tribe is evolving, you're saying, I'm going to evolve, but I'm going to do it very, very slowly. And if you want to manifest, if you want to really become a manifester in your life, you don't have enough time in this lifetime. You've got to come back in 19 lifetimes. Right? You don't have enough time for that. So it's almost like getting out of that consciousness. When the question was asked of Dr. Maslow, when I asked him this question personally, what does it mean to be self-actualized? He said there are three things that you have to know and understand. One is you have to learn to become independent of the good opinion of other people. That's like at the top of the list. You have to become independent. Self-actualizers are independent of the good opinion of other people. Secondly, self-actualizers are people who have no attachment to the outcome. They are detached from the fruits of their labors. They know what their life is about, and they get on with that, and they don't get themselves concerned with how it's going to work out. They turn that over to God. They just have this knowing that it will, and that's enough. And the third is that they have no investment in power over other people. No investment in power over other people. So they're not really trying to convince anybody else or to subjugate anybody else or to dominate anyone else with their abilities. And these people who have these divine capacities are usually very, very quiet about it. And they will get disapproval and they will acknowledge it. And it's okay. They just move along. They don't allow that to be the focus of what it is that they're going to do in their lives. I can't tell you how many people, but it's up in the hundreds of thousands, that have written to me over the past quarter of a century and told me their difficulties, their struggles, and how if they would have learned one of these three lessons, or all three of these lessons, to be independent of the good opinion of other people, to be detached from the outcome, and to get rid of your investment in the need to have power over other people, how much peace you would have in your life.
Everything, remember, has a dharma. Every creature, every rose, and every human being has a dharma. You're already fulfilling it physically. You're already in the bodies that you were intended to be in. Remember what I said before, it is not about where you are, it's about what direction you're headed. And as long as you know you're heading in the direction of staying here in meaning. Now, this concept of a calling,
I mean, I wrote a whole book about it. It's called Inspiration, in Spirit. And the subtitle is called Your Ultimate Calling. So I'm going to introduce a word here to help you to identify your calling. And that word is passion. And it doesn't make any difference to me whether that passion has anything to do with making a living, or it's a part of the DOT, the Dictionary of Occupational Titles. What is it that you find passion about? And the only condition I place on it is that it is in alignment with God or with your source. All right? So that your passion, if your passion is about killing other people, for example, if your passion is about stealing, if your passion is about, I often said that there's two ways to have the tallest building in town. One of the ways to have the tallest building in town, always, is to go around and knock down anybody else's building when they start getting taller than yours. So as soon as they get up, if you're at the 44 floors and they get to 43, 44, you just go over and you put some explosives in there and you just blow it up. And you say, I have the tallest building in town. And this is, by the way, our collective ego. This is what we do in our society and in our world, and which is about, if you really want to know my passion and my calling, it's about shifting the entire consciousness of this planet before I leave it. And that's why the film titled The Shift is so significant to me, because I know that if I can get 10 million people to watch that film, The Shift, if I can get 10 million people in America and Canada to watch that film, that we reach something called pi, 3.1416, remember? And if you can get 3.1416% of a population to align, the rest of it's called a critical mass in physics. You reach what is called phase transition. And if you align enough people or electrons or subatomic particles up and align them in a certain way in an energy field, and you reach what they call the 100th monkey, when you reach that point, all the rest of the electrons or the people in that energy field begin to align as well. And we have aligned ourselves collectively with a consciousness that allows for people to knock down other people's buildings. The other way to have the tallest building in town is to always work on your own building and not be concerned with anybody else's building or what anyone else out there is doing, or being consumed with trying to compete with or win or defend. To listen to your calling. So your calling is the thing within you that has your attention, that has your passionate attention. And it doesn't make any difference whether it makes sense to anybody else. It's the thing that you feel inside of you that you're here for. It's Mr. Holland in Mr. Holland's opus. And here's the secret. Here's the thing that I learned. That it's the presence of the passion. That when you have the presence of the passion within you for what it is that you feel is your calling, everything else will take care of itself. That is an indication that you have God within you and guiding you. The word enthusiasm, and theos, iasm, translates to the God within in Greek. The God within. When you are enthusiastic about something, anything, when you have that kind of internal knowing that this is what I'm doing. And sometimes you have to, that Shakespeare's, he wasn't just a great writer, he was an incredible philosopher. Probably the most famous lines from Shakespeare are from Hamlet. To be or not to be, that is the question. And that's a very profound question. But what follows that is much more profound. He said, after to be or not to be, that is the question. Whether 'tis nobler in the minds of men to suffer the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune, or to take arms against a sea of troubles, and thus, by opposing, end them. You have to ask the question, and that's what this program is about, and that's what the movie is about, and that's what the book is about, and that's what all of it is about. To be or not to be. Am I going to be who I came into this world to be, and there's something inside of me that has always been calling me to it? Or am I going to allow the slings and arrows of an outrageous fortune that has been imposed upon me by others to dictate my dharma? That's really the question. And it's a question that you can answer and respond to and live with.
I went through a couple of quotes. One was from Valerie Hunt's book, The Infinite Mind, which is the display quote for the 6th chapter of Spiritual Solution. She said, "But I do not believe that man can perceive his godlike qualities until his field reaches higher and higher vibrations and attains a greater degree of coherency. No matter how hard we may try to receive spiritual guidance, we cannot until our fields are attuned to that vibrational system called God." Let me share that with you again. "But I do not believe that man can perceive his godlike qualities until his field reaches higher and higher vibrations and attains a greater degree of coherency." So that you can sit there in anger and in fear and in shame and all of the reactions in your life that compute to make you weak, and that will make sense shortly. And you can never come to know God according to the mind field theory that Dr. Hunt espouses and talks about, and according to a spiritual solution to every problem. Because when you're not at peace, you have sent your body into a vibrational field of energy in which you have allowed your mind to create the error or the illusion that you and God are no longer connected. And that begins to take over. And as hard as you may try, and no matter what you may do, until you can raise the frequency at which you vibrate, until you can raise the energy level at which you experience life, and move out of the lower and slower frequencies and into the higher frequencies, you will not be able to access and negotiate the presence of a spiritual solution to your problems.
You see, the intellect has trouble with this, because the intellect is the mind and the mind is the ego. If you ask most people, where is your center? Where are you centered? They will point to their head. Where do you originate from? Where is your source? Where is your ability to think and to process? They will point to their head, and they will say, it's in my brain. My brain is what makes me be able to think and be able to understand concepts and so on. If you ask a spiritual being, where is your source? Where is your center? What is it that gives you the ability to understand these great miraculous things? They will point to their heart. And so, heart consciousness is very different than head consciousness. The head consciousness is one which tries to analyze it, so tries to figure it out, and has a great deal of difficulty with it because it's coming from this position of separateness. The heart is your intuition. The heart is the part of you that says, I know and I trust, and it works for me, and I don't have to convince anyone else of it. And once you have this, even prayer becomes not like, most people think of prayer as like, God is like this huge vending machine in the sky, all right? And I put in my tokens, and I behave in a certain way, and certain things are going to come to me. But there's an authentic kind of prayer that is very different than this. And this kind of prayer is one in which your prayer is in communion with God rather than separation from. I turn it over to this higher part, but it's not something that I'm ever separate from. That's trust. That kind of trust, in combination with knowing that you're no longer afraid of being God. Know ye that ye are gods, and I am in you, and you are in me, and I am in the Father, and the Father is in me. It's like this is something that we are being taught, and yet we have been conditioned almost to subscribe to another idea which says that I am not trustworthy, I am separate from, I can't do those things. That has to be transcended. You have to understand that in terms of people using it to give fear to you. And our greatest fear is the fear that we're going to be alone, that we're going to be abandoned. But this universal intelligence that is everywhere, this divine intelligence that is universal, that is in all things, how can it abandon us? Wherever we go, it's there. When you trust in that and know it without any doubt, you begin to see it everywhere. You see it in the flowers. You see it in the sunsets. You see it in your babies and in your mother-in-law. You see it in all places. And what you're doing when you see it is you're recognizing that I am worthy, and I am important, and I am significant. Yes, I am connected to God. I am what God is doing. And that's the subject of the next principle. Honoring your worthiness to receive. Thank you.
Quote from A Course in Miracles. The memory of God comes to the quiet mind. It cannot come where there is conflict. For a mind at war against itself remembers not eternal gentleness. What you remember is a part of you, for you must be as God created you. Let all this madness be undone for you, and turn in peace to the remembrance of God, still shining in your quiet mind. It's about remembering our origination. I committed this passage to memory many years ago, and I use it as a way to remember who I truly am and where I really came from, particularly when I communicate with my Creator, to stay on purpose and in spirit. Now I'd like to go through each of the messages in this observation from A Course in Miracles one by one. Number 1, the memory of God comes to the quiet mind. We came from a quiet, peaceful place. That's the very essence of creation. So when our mind is filled with noisy dialogue, we shut out the possibility of remembering our spirit. Incessant chatter keeps us attached to the physical world and produces anxiety, stress, fear, worry, and so many of the emotional reactions that are decidedly removed from God realization. We must minimize distractions when we wish to communicate with God. So being in nature, away from the artificial noises that invade our space, is helpful. But the most important thing to consider is how to keep our mind free from the dizzying, bewildering cascade of thoughts flowing through our head from morning till night, and even on into our dream state. It's been estimated that we have something like 60,000 separate thoughts every day. The real problem is that we have the same 60,000 thoughts today that we had yesterday. I've made the practice of meditation a part of my daily life because it's one way to quiet the mind so that the memory of God is accessible. So by learning to meditate, or at the very least shutting down the inner dialogue produced, directed, and acted upon by your ego, you can open up a space for remembering and returning to spirit. 2, it cannot come where there is conflict. In order for conflict to exist, there must be two opposing forces at work. That is, one force, in the form of an idea, a point of view, a desire, or a contribution, directly clashes with another. Conflict defines our lives in many ways, as we oppose our partners, our children, our bosses, our neighbors, and even our countries. In politics, it's always one party versus the other. And the entertainment industry portrays battling points of view that are usually turned into violent scenes. Essentially, conflict requires two-ness. However, remembering where we came from involves our returning to the oneness of being in spirit. After all, there are no battling powers in the divine realm of spirit. There's only perfect oneness. And this is what we want to rejoin. We want to become one again with our Creator. And we can't retrieve this memory of God with a mind in conflict in any way. 3, For a mind at war against itself remembers not eternal gentleness. The second part of this teaching from A Course in Miracles reinforces that a combative mind cannot remember where it once resided in eternal gentleness. Obviously, you can't wage war and simultaneously focus on peace and gentleness, and it is eternal gentleness that you want to remember and rejoin. It's really quite simple to do this. Just close down the battlefield and surrender. Remove all of the artillery, send the soldiers home, and replace the instruments of war in your mind with thoughts of peace, tranquility, and surrender. Making your mind a place of peace is achieved by your own will, so steadfastly refusing to have thoughts of conflict allows you to activate the glory of remembering your spirit. 4, the fourth part of this quote. What you remember is a part of you. Every memory I have is me. What a glorious feeling it is to know this. We each have the power to retrieve any piece of ourselves that we desire and to experience it right here, right now, in this present moment. The great Danish theologian Søren Kierkegaard once observed that life can only be understood backwards, but it must be lived forwards. In other words, if we can't go back and remember the spiritual bliss that defined us before the beginning, we've really abandoned a part of ourselves. As we move into communion with God, we must know that our inability to remember our spiritual origins is another way of really saying, quote, I'm unable to know myself because I have no recollection or memory of my spirit, unquote. In fact, the corollary of this line from A Course in Miracles that we're processing right now would be, what you don't remember is not a part of you. In other words, if we fail to remember spirit, then obviously it isn't a part of us. And 5, for you must be as God created you. As you communicate with your source of being, know that you're awakening a part of yourself that's just like God. In fact, you ought to try to approach communication with God by being as closely aligned to the way that you were created as possible. That is, by becoming a vibrational match to the all-loving Creator. Come to the quiet moments in consultation with God in love, in peace, and without judgment. As A Course in Miracles is saying, you must be as you were created. So why put on a false mask and pretend to be anything or anyone else? In this way, you can open the channel of communication because you finally remembered to be the way you were created. And that's the key to effective prayer. And as Gandhi once said, prayer is not an old woman's idle amusement. Properly understood and applied, it's the most potent instrument of action. And 6, let all this madness be undone for you, and turn in peace to the remembrance of God still shining in your quiet mind. Let's take the 3 suggestions in this teaching one at a time. First, A Course says, let this madness be undone. The madness here is that of living in a state of conflict. In other words, we must make an attempt to transcend the dichotomies of our life because the division creates so much suffering and keeps us from living an inspired life. I remember a Ram Dass lecture in which he said, I firmly come to the conclusion that there are no thems for me anymore. I can't be told who to hate, who to fight, who to subdue. I only see an us in my heart. All those messages to divvy up our world are insane. All our self-centeredness just drives our ego's insatiable appetite for making us special and putting other people down. The Course encourages us to be done with this madness once and for all, both in our minds and in our actions. And second, we're told to turn in peace to the remembrance of God. Once again, we know in our heart that we came from a place of peace. So any discord can't be the result of our Creator's actions. God cannot come to us when we pray from non-peace, so the solution is to return to the remembrance of Him and ask to be made an instrument of His peace. When I find myself out of sorts, I remember. And what I remember is to turn to peace right now in prayer. I become peace rather than anguish, and I feel the calmness I long for come over me like a wave of pleasurable relief.